So in this video, I want to help you guys understand how to go through the Bible. You know, as simple as that may sound, it's actually very much more complex than you'd like it to be. But I'm sure if you bear with me and you take the time to understand the points that I'm going to bring up and all the things that I'm going to say, then you will begin to understand more or less where I'm coming from and how I'm viewing the text. So here's the first thing that you need to understand about the Bible and God and having faith is that you can never take how other people interpret the Bible, the revelations that other people have gotten, the way that God has revealed the Bible to some individual, or to some, not even God revealed, to how life has revealed the Bible to some individual, and take that as the end all be all of what you see the Bible to be. So you cannot take someone's opinion of what they feel the Bible is unless you've gone through the text yourself. One thing that I realize in this generation is that there are a lot of people who are, let's say if you're in school, 50% student, if you're in school and you got 50% for most of your subjects, that means you have something about you, about your comprehension, about your understanding, about something about the way that you see the text, the subjects, the knowledge that you are learning in school, that gave you 50% of understanding the entirety of the text. So that same person can decide, sometimes even the person who failed school and failed, we're getting 30%, 20%, that person can just decide they want to go to Bible college, or they want to start reading the Bible, and then they can decide that they want to start preaching to people, they want to start teaching people, they want to start a church. That's how simple and easy it is for the Bible to then now be in the hands of someone who may not understand to the full extent of the understanding or knowledge that is in the book. But here's the thing about God. God does account for those things. God does account for the people who lack understanding, who lack wisdom, who lack, knowledge. He accounts for them by giving wise men, the smart people, the wise people, to show and guide people on the right path, on the right way. So now that we've cleared up about interpretation, you have to also understand that the culture and the background that the person who's reading the Bible comes from will play a big role when it comes to understanding the Bible. So if you're a strict, you grew up in a strict home, in like a very rough culture where maybe forcing things is the way that people usually operate in that culture, when you then read the Bible, you're going to be drawn towards believing in a specific type of God. So you will then see God in a different light compared to someone who grows up in a different culture. So if you, let's say, are in, maybe an Afrikaans culture, you're reading the Bible will be interpreted according to the things that you grow up with. So if you're also from, a Black culture, when you read the Bible, you will also then begin to look through the lens of a person coming from your background. So everything that comes from where you come from will be highlighted every time you're reading, to the point where it can actually make you very biased in a direction where you're almost even not looking at things that are against what you believe. You might be forcing text and information in the Bible to support your background, support where you're coming from, support where you are, where you grew up. So when you understand that nature of the Bible, that your culture, the lens that you look at it, the person who can teach you, that people can teach you the Bible who may not necessarily be the best or have the best understanding or the most wisdom, then you can understand that you can easily be misled by people who fail to interpret what the Bible was trying to say. So culture, background, great. So the next thing that we want to speak about then is when you actually start reading the Bible. So here's, for me personally, what I had to go through for myself is that people love to just speak about something that they don't know about. People love to speak about God, but they don't know about God. People love to, make reference to God, to pray for people. They love to make reference to, what God can do and all these things. But the one thing that most people get wrong is that they don't go through the text. They believe in this God, a God who's going to do so many things for you, a God that you're asking for all these things, but you haven't taken the time to personally go through the text from beginning to end to understand what it is that is in the book and what it is that is going on in that book. So one thing that I did for myself is that I went through the whole Bible, a couple of times. The first time I just went through just to go through. Second time I went through writing down miracles and notes on all the things that God could do. So at the first time I just wanted to read with the lens of trying to understand what's going on. Second time I went through the Bible, my lens was now faith of, if I believe God is real, if I believe God can do A, B, C, D, E, then where can I see that in the Bible? Like what I'm asking for God, where can I see an example of that in the Bible? What my journey looks like, where can I see an example of that in the Bible? Where I am in my journey, where can I see an example of that in the Bible? So first time, second time, and here's what I can tell you from what I've come to understand. Everything that is in the Bible that people, you will begin to understand that there are things that are not in the Bible that churches have and churches are doing, that some of them don't even go with, the statutes, the laws, the commandments that God put, and the way that God lived his life, So you will start to find out that because so many people have misinterpreted the text or placed their own culture on top of the text, or place their own culture as a lens, or place their own culture as an overlying cover, you start to see a lot of things where you're wondering to yourself, why is this being done? And there's no biblical reference to it in the Bible. You don't see why you have to dress this specific way for you to go to church. You don't see where this church type came from. You don't see what could have started, etc., 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 etc. So you will start to notice that there are things that people have included into the Bible or into believing and having faith in God that are not even necessary. So when you then read through the text and you understand this one thing, is that you're going to have to allow the Bible to speak to you, to guide you, to help you understand what's happening by itself. You have to allow God, and this is something that I personally believe that you should do for yourself. You must allow God to move in the text and speak to you in the text by asking him. Just go and say, God, as I'm reading the text, please teach me, please help me understand, please help me. Ask him whatever it is that you want to ask him, and he will begin to show you how the Bible works. But the main thing now that you need to understand is that you need to know the beginning to the end of the text. When you have the beginning to the end of the text, then you will understand that the Bible is connected. Everything about the Bible is connected. So you cannot just pick a simple verse from, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, etc., etc., etc. Or maybe for some, I know people like to quote a lot of verses in the New Testament where they'll say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And they take that one, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me verse, and they want to use that verse to fight their entire life. They want to use that as their solid backbone to every single circumstance, challenge, and everything that comes their way. They say, oh no, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And then when they don't get the results from I can do all things, maybe there was a job opening and you had that belief and you didn't get that, and now you're looking at yourself and saying, why isn't this happening? Like it says in the Bible that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So why aren't things happening that way? Why does it say that whatever I ask for, believe that you will receive it and it'll be yours? Whatever you ask for in my name, believe that you will receive it and it'll be yours. Why isn't that working? But here's the thing about the Bible is that you have to know that Everything is connected. So you cannot take a small piece, that one piece that I just spoke about, and run with it the whole way. You need to understand that there's that piece, and then there'll be another piece somewhere else that will say, acknowledge the Lord in all your ways, and He will give you, and He will direct your paths. So now, okay, there's a verse that you heard where it says, whatever you ask for my name, believe that you will receive and it will be yours. Okay, then it says, acknowledge the Lord in all that ways, and He'll give you, and He'll direct your paths. Okay, then there's another verse now that you need to understand. Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. So yes, your prayers can be answered. Yes, whatever you ask for in my name, believe that you will receive it and it will be yours. Yes, 100% true, 100% correct. But you have to have delighted yourself in the Lord so that He can give you the desires of your heart. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So it's not just a case of I can just stamp on my verse and say, boom, this is what it means. This is what's I'm wanna run with this small piece. Because if I can do the same thing, I can take 1 Samuel 17 verse 24, bring the ephod. What does that mean? Nothing. It means nothing. What does John whatever Jesus wept? What does that mean? What does that verse mean? Do you get what I'm trying to say? Can I walk around and say Jesus wept? Verse. Do you get what I'm trying to say? There's no reason, there's no background, there's no understanding, there's no direction as to why you're doing that. So when you then understand that the Bible works as a complete text, that when it says all things work together for good for those who love Him and are called for a purpose, if you then refer to the Old Testament, and let's say we just take anyone's story, let's say Joseph. Joseph is sold by his brothers. He goes to Egypt. He goes through all those things that he was going through, so that he could become prime minister, or the high position that he held in Egypt, so that he could save his dad, his brothers, and his family who were still, in the wilderness. So he had to go ahead of his family so that he could save them from the famine that was coming. So you have to then understand that what happened, all things work together for good for those who love Him and are called for a purpose. The bad things that happened to Joseph, all the bad things, all the good things, all the ups and downs, people cursing him, people lying to him, people making lies on his name, all those things were happening and all leading him towards a direction. They were leading him towards his destination. All things work together for good for those who love Him and are called for a purpose. The good things and the bad things all work together for good for those who love Him and are called for a purpose. So then you understand that, okay, it's not just about what you get in that current moment and what you understand in that current moment of, I can take my one piece verse, or I can say, I'm going to wake up and say, okay, today I'm going to read John. And then you read John, and then tomorrow I say, oh, tomorrow I'm going to read. You need to know the text from beginning to end, because it is a story, it is a testimony, it is a testament of what God has done and who God is. So if you don't know the text in order, you can't understand what God is doing. You can't understand the movement of God in time, in reality, in life, because here's the thing about the Bible. It always speaks from multiple perspectives. So let's say in John, it's bringing a close view. In Genesis, it's a generational view of like 5 generations down the line. In Samuel, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, Kings, it's like in 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, it's like in 2 generations. So it's giving you a viewpoint that's more in detailed, more so that you can understand the workings of God in a smaller scale and in a larger scale. So there's the bigger scale of, you are looking at Genesis. It speaks about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the things that happened to them. But it speaks about them very briefly compared to the way it speaks about David in, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. And it speaks very differently to the way it speaks about Jesus in his time. And then it speaks very differently in the Gospels when it speaks about John's way of understanding Jesus' time. Every single piece of the Bible is explaining a different aspect of God, generational, personal, spiritual. When you start moving with God, what are the type of things that happen? When you are with God, what are the type of things that happen? What gifts does a prophet have? What gifts are operating? Obviously, there's the explanation of all these gifts and all this understanding in the books of Paul and all those things in the New Testament. But all those things are easy to understand if you understand what happened in the Old Testament all the way through to when Jesus arrives. You won't even need Paul to explain, but his explanations are great, and everything he speaks about, he just adds more to understanding what the Christian journey is about. So for you then to just walk around with your one piece, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, you will not succeed. You will not get the results that you're looking for. You will not be able to seek God and know God and truly be what you're trying to be, which is a Christian. You will not actually be able to understand to what extent God is working in life, to what extent God is moving in life, how he's touching, where he's blessing, how he blesses. You won't be able to understand seasons and how seasons operate, how long most seasons will be. When it says that Joseph, was sold by his brothers after he had been so great in Potiphar's house, so he went into prison for 3-4 years. Or however long that was. Or that maybe Abraham, when he was waiting for his promised son, he had to wait 14 years. That maybe Hannah, year after year, Hannah was made to feel like, she was less because she couldn't conceive. And after some time, she did conceive, but it was all part of God's plan. And the child that she waited for, the child that Abraham waited for, the child that Rachel waited for, was the blessed son, was the one that they had been waiting for all this time. The one who was going to keep the blessing, the one who was going to succeed. All those things are all part of understanding the journey that you will face when you are a Christian, when you are trying to move with God. That's why I then say it is not great to hear someone else's perspective on the Bible, because they have a reason why they started reading the Bible, and they read the Bible with an intention of getting something, of believing something. Whatever it is that was on their mind at the time that they went through the Bible is what was most prevalent in all the revelations that they got. So sometimes they might be very biased in many directions, or they might have a culture or whatever it is that's going to stop them from giving you an accurate advice on the Bible. So when you understand those things about the Bible, then you can then grow. And for me personally, that has helped me grow a lot, to be able to look at the text for myself and see what is right, what is wrong, what does God want from us, how can I serve God, what does God say about this, what does God say about that. And when you follow his statutes and commandments, what does that lead to? Blessings, curses, sin causing curses, sin causing sickness. You don't understand any of those concepts. You don't understand any of the concepts of God leaving sin, and sin always leading to destruction, and sin always becoming the place that God's people die. That all the blessings that people couldn't receive, all the blessings that people lost, all came from sin. Everything that was great, that God intended for us to be good, was taken by sin. When you then understand that, and you understand that God came then to save us from that sin, to save us from our own bad decisions, then you understand a different aspect as well. But yeah, to understand the Bible is a very complex dynamic. But just thought about it now as well. Every time you go through the Bible, again, like if you go through the Bible and then you go through it again and then you go through it again, every time you go through it, you will get wiser, you will get smarter, and you will get a new revelation. Every time you go through the Bible, you will begin to spot things that you didn't spot last time. You're like, oh, did I see this before? Did I see this? That's always how the Bible works. You will always learn something new every time you read the Bible. If you feel like there are too many revelations, or you finish the number of revelations that are in the Bible, just go through the Bible another time and you will see everything from a different perspective. The time that you are in your life, like if you are going through a difficult time in your life, if you read the Bible, certain things will illuminate themselves. If you are in a happy time in your life and you read the Bible, certain things are going to be illuminated in your understanding, in your reading, in your looking at the word. So that also plays a factor in, how you view the Bible, because you will then feel what it is to have perspective. When you're also going through a dark time, when you're also fighting for your life, when you're also on the run, then you understand what David felt. Even though God was with him, and even though God loved David, and even though God never left David, he went through periods where he was also, struggling. He was also in a tough space. And you can read all about those periods in the book of Psalms. But if you read about his life in, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, and in Chronicles, then you understand the difficult moments that he had and all the losses that he took, his wife being taken from him, all this happening under God's supervision. That's what I mean by, if you don't have the Bible, and the more you grow, the more you understand the world, and the more you go through your own personal life circumstances, the better you're going to understand what's going on in the Bible. Because then now, when David says he's crying day and night, and when, the elders of Israel finally call him after 7 years to become king of Israel, and he goes dancing into the palace, and you have a similar moment where you've been waiting for God, and finally you also get to dance into the palace. When you read that part in the Bible next time, you're going to have a different understanding to it. You're going to have a different knowledge to it, because you've experienced it yourself, or you felt it yourself. That's what I mean by, every time you read the Bible, you will always have a new revelation as well, because a person who has kids and a person who doesn't have kids will understand more of the Bible than someone else. A person who has a family or doesn't have a family, a person who has a gift or doesn't have a gift, a person who's, who knows what it is to be human, will have a different perspective from someone who doesn't know what it is to be human. But yeah.